Thank you all for joining us. If you've missed any of our previous 6 sessions, we've recorded them. They're on aef.com. We did sessions on the future of marketing and consumer insights and multicultural marketing. So if you missed those, check them out. This session will also be recorded. So if you have to cut out early or you know someone who wanted to tune in but couldn't, send them over to aef.com. Today, we're welcoming Natalie Kim. She is a former strategist turned founder of We Are Next, which is a community and resource for students in marketing and advertising and new hires. And she is helping the next generation of talent enter the industry and get their foot in the door. So we're very excited to have her here today to talk about this summer, if you have an internship or if you don't, and what comes next after this summer. So thank you all for joining us, and I'll let Natalie take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so grateful that this resource that usually is reserved for made interns has been opened up to the broader public and to all students. So thank you again for having me. I wanted to say really quickly, I love that a lot of people are going to come and tune in. I know this week has been really emotionally and mentally a lot for a lot of people. If watching this and hearing me talk about this is helpful right now because it feels like it'll get you where you want to go or you have some control over what's going on in the world, welcome. I hope this will help. If this isn't going to help you if you're like, I can't even just listen to something like this right now because there's just so much going on, and you need to tap out, please do so. As Sarah said, it's going to be recorded, so no hard feelings if you have to duck out. Anyways, with that said, I'm going to get started. Our roadmap today, I'm going to talk a little bit about getting the most out of your internship, with the skew towards a lot of these internships being virtual this summer. And if you don't have an internship this summer, that's okay too. This information is relevant, for whatever internship you might have in the future. So hopefully it's still helpful. And for the second part, we're going to talk about what to do if your internship doesn't end with a full-time offer. A lot of times an internship is like the gateway into that full-time job. But that doesn't always happen, right? There are certain things we can't control. So we'll talk about what to do in that scenario. And again, I think for the second part, if you don't have an internship right now, that part will be really relevant for you as well. All right, so let's start with getting the most out of your internship. I think what's really important about this topic and kind of feeling like you can take the driver's seat in your own internship is that really at the end of the day, nobody cares about your career more than you. I mean, we have mentors and allies along the way in our career, hopefully, and they're very important, but no one thinks about your career as much as you do. No one has as much at stake, in your career as you do, and no one knows what you're thinking and feeling as you go through your career. So it's really up to us to take that driver's seat, to take as much control as we can in directing kind of how our internships go, how our first-time jobs go, and for the rest of our career. So I wanted to share about 5 tips for your internship this summer, virtual. Otherwise, if it ends up being in office later this summer, that's great. But I'm going to kind of ground it in the understanding that a lot of these will be virtual. And I think one of the most important things in any internship is to be getting regular feedback throughout the summer. Some agencies will have, or companies will have, review cycles. So maybe they do it, once at the beginning and once at the end of your internship, or sometimes maybe once a month. I really think, especially this summer with everything online, setting up check-ins with your direct manager every week, maybe it's every Friday morning, you do a 15-minute check-in with your manager is so important. And the reason is that if you're doing your internship, you want to know at any given point how you're doing, what you can improve on, where maybe you're falling short, and really opening up and embracing the feedback instead of fearing feedback. Sometimes we're a little bit hesitant to receive feedback, especially when we're young, because it means maybe we're not doing the best job ever or like 100% in the eyes of our teammates. But it's really okay. Obviously internships are a learning experience, and wouldn't you want to know what people wanted out of you along the way instead of waiting until the end of the summer and then someone says, hey, we kind of wish you did more of this. when you could have known along the way. So setting in those regular check-ins and really chasing after that time. Again, it doesn't have to be a big formal thing with your manager. 15 minutes on the calendar, chase them for it, and really approaching it not just as a time for you to get feedback on your performance, like that's part of it, but also a conversation about how you can better support the team, right? So there's benefit to the agency too for you having these check-ins, right? So make that clear to your manager. And if you have a manager who, for whatever reason, is really busy and can't find that 15 minutes per week, find someone else on your team that you work a lot with to do that check-in on the days that your manager just isn't available. It's so important to have these little touch points along the way. And I think the more time and face time you can have with your manager and your team talking about your performance, the more invested they're going to be in you kind of for the long run. So that's tip number one. Tip number two, understanding the bigger picture. So a lot of times when we are interns, we're given what feels like very isolated tasks. So they're kind of small, manageable things like go find us all mentions of this, brand on social and analyze how people are talking about the brand, right? In order to do that job, that task well, you have to understand the bigger picture. How does that task fit in with what the rest of the teams are doing? How does it fit into what the client is asking the agency to do, or a big project that the agency is working on or the company is working on for the client? And if it's not obvious what the bigger picture is, definitely ask when you get the task. So, they'll say, hey, can you do this? You can say, great, that sounds awesome. I'd love to talk a little bit about the context or the background for this specific task. Like, how is it going to be used? I know there's so many background details that your manager should be able, or whoever's asking you to do this task should provide in order for you to not only do this task really well, but also be able to proactively move forward with your next steps. So this is like one of the best things that an intern can do. We talk about being proactive, but what does that actually mean? This is a really good way to be proactive. So I have a concrete example for you, because sometimes it feels like you're talking in abstracts. So let's say you have a meeting with your team and you're in the meeting, you're taking notes, as every good intern should do during a meeting, even if it's virtual. After the meeting, without anyone asking, type up a summary of what you heard, what you think is important. It doesn't have to be like a play-by-play of the whole meeting, but pull out what you thought was most important. Summarize any next steps that you think should be taken based on the information you got, based on your understanding of this big picture, as I said, and then share that with the team and be like, hey, everyone, just summarize the meeting notes and think that for my next step, I should do this, this, and this. Even if you're off, even if your manager's like, hey, actually, can you do this first? They're going to appreciate that you are trying to move things forward instead of waiting to be told what to do. And that, as a manager, is gold, because managing an intern is actually a lot of work and a lot of brain power. So if you can take some of that load off of them, they're going to be so grateful. They're going to want to keep you around. Raise your hand for help. This is true in any situation in your career, but especially as an intern. Again, you're there to learn. You're not there to do everything perfectly right away. And I think instead of feeling like you have to sit there and figure it out on your own if you really don't know what to do, definitely ask someone on the team or your manager, whoever's overseeing your project, for a little bit of guidance. There's really no shame in that. It's much better to do that up front if you really don't know what to do, versus spin your wheels and then a couple days goes by and your manager checks in on what you've been doing and you're like, I don't really have that much to show because I didn't know what to do. So totally avoidable. No shame in asking. And I think this is especially important this summer for those things that seem really basic about conducting work in a virtual environment. So whether that's presenting on Zoom, which is really awkward for a lot of people, or operating in a meeting on Zoom or whatever platform, Slack etiquette, whatever it is that might seem really intuitive to your team members because they've been doing it for a while now. Ask them for like a little tutorial or a little help up front. It'll make the whole summer so much smoother once you've ironed out all those things that will come inevitably with trying to work remotely. It's not the easiest thing. It seems pretty intuitive, but there are certain things I think that we could all use a little guidance with. So definitely raise your hand for help. No shame in what you don't know. This next slide is about the amount of work that you'll have this summer. And there's kind of two scenarios that interns fall into. The first scenario is having too much work, so being overloaded. This might seem like a good problem to have, but we don't want to burn out in our internship. You're just kind of getting started in your career. And if you get to that point of burnout with too much, stuff on your plate, your work output is going to suffer. And we obviously don't want that. So one of the things that I think interns fall into is the need to say yes. So we think as interns and as, low on the totem pole people in the company, we have to say yes to everything that comes our way. And that's not to say that I'm saying you should say no to anything. We obviously want the opportunities, we want the work, but there's also no harm in saying, all right, that sounds great. I'd love to take this on. Let me talk to this other team member who gave me this other assignment to see if I can balance these priorities. And working with your managers or whoever, again, is giving you these tasks is really important. That communication might not be happening between the two managers. Again, especially in an online environment where they're not crossing paths in the office or they're not seeing you, day to day, like at your desk when you're not on a Zoom call. So they don't see how much you're doing. Start that conversation. If you're feeling overloaded, be like, hey, I'd love for this group to sit down and help prioritize the tasks that I have, and just being really clear about what is on your plate. I had an intern once who every morning on Slack would message me with like a little list of like the things that she was working on that day. And it was really helpful just to know. And again, it didn't even need a response from me. She was just kind of like, FYI, these are my tasks today. And she kind of prioritized them. Really smart way to like keep that communication open and transparent between the team members who are giving you work. Because again, they might not always know how much you have on your plate. So definitely feel free to have that conversation so that you don't end up feeling super overwhelmed and just super burnt out in your internship. On the flip side, this is also a very common problem, is not having enough work, which sucks because, you're trying to get work experience. You don't want to be wasting your time, especially if you're going to be working from home. It's like, you want to be doing as much as you can this summer during your internship. But this is a very common problem. And I have an inkling that this summer it might be even worse. Like it might happen more frequently because, again, like just not having that in-person energy or not being able to go into like really observe like what an intern is doing, I think it's more likely, or there's a greater chance that interns can fall through the cracks, which I'm glad we're having this talk, because now if that starts to happen to you, you can be like, hey, like you'll know what to do, instead of just accepting the fact that no one has anything for you to do. So if you find yourself in this situation where the work is really light, you've asked a bunch of people, hey, I'm free right now, like anything I can help you with. If they're all like, I'm good, no worries. Business is a lot of times slower, in the summer, not to mention what's going on right now. So there might not be as much for you to do. Again, this connects back to the bigger picture, right? The understanding the bigger picture. If you've understood the bigger picture and kind of the inner workings of the agency, find other opportunities to add value. So some concrete examples again. Let's say, my favorite example is, let's say that that the agency really wants to land an auto client, right? They don't have an auto client. They really want to land, one of the auto brands. And so if you know that, and you've talked to the new business team about that, maybe you start like a little like weekly newsletter where you're just collecting news about, the auto world or auto trends. And, we're adding like a little bit of commentary and just sending it out to, whether it's the whole agency, your team, or the new business team, just to let them know that you're keeping your eye out for what's going on in this world that the agency wants to tap into. Maybe you help source interesting content for an agency's social media channels. I mean, social media, again, we all know it's like a 24/7 channel, and it's hard for agencies to continue to put out interesting content. So that's a really easy way for you to add value right there. Maybe some decks needs like a serious design overhaul, like the presentation decks that you can easily do. Again, these are just ways that if you went up to someone and asked, hey, do you have anything for me to do? They probably might not like say those things that I just said. It takes you kind of understanding, you know, what's going on at the agency, what would be valuable to the agency to proactively do those things. And like, it's almost like a little surprise and delight. And be like, hey, you know, I had a little bit of free time. I ended up putting together like a little deck of Gen Z trends, because I know we're always pulling stats for pitch decks and stuff. So I just thought it'd be great to have kind of this database of Gen Z facts. Oh my gosh, everyone would be so grateful that you just kind of went ahead and did that. Again, adding value in kind of unsuspecting ways is a great way to continue to, you know, build your experience and add value during your internship when kind of the client work might be a little bit on the light side. All right, this is the last tip, I think, for the internship portion. So a huge part of your internship is connecting with people at the company, right? And obviously there's a barrier this summer being distant and doing things virtually, but I still think there are ways to make those connections that you're looking for. One thing I will say is that because we're all distant, I do think everyone is kind of craving that connection. So even the people who might have been a little bit more inaccessible or just, you know, don't usually have the time to connect with young talent, I'm seeing in the industry people are much more willing to have those conversations, whether it's with people internally or externally. So let's all take advantage of that fact. I do think there's a right way and a wrong way to reach out to people and to, even within your company, to you know, ask for some of their time. I think reaching out to people, and I'll say this again in kind of the next section, but being really specific about who you reach out to in the company and letting them know like why you want to connect with them. And I think, like, you know, certainly people on your team doing like a one-on-one virtual coffee or whatever it is, just having like a video call with them, especially towards the beginning in the first couple weeks of your internship, is a really great way to just like establish that kind of like team feel and get to know people on a more individual level. It's kind of hard to do like in a group setting, especially virtually. So I would encourage everyone, like in the first couple weeks of your internship, just again, put 30 minutes on the calendar with each of your direct team members, so that you can get to know them and hear a little bit more about their experience at the agency. And you'll find in those one-on-one conversations, you'll get a lot of insight into kind of the inner workings of the agency. I don't want to say you'll get the tea, but like people will open up about kind of how to best work with certain people, or the way that this manager likes to communicate, and just in general, this client is kind of a pain in the butt, but they're really smart. You know, all those little insights that only come from actual work experience, you can get from those conversations. So I encourage you to still do that at the beginning of your internship. And then for other people who are outside of kind of your core team, you know, through the summer, maybe like once a week or more, if you're feeling feisty, like once a week, finding someone whom you want to connect with, and again, being really specific to them why you're reaching out. It's not just because you're the intern and you're trying to like make a lot of connections. Like, what about them that you can see online or from their interactions? Maybe you're in a meeting with them and they did like an amazing presentation and they're like an amazing speaker, and you want to like know, like, how did they, what are some tips that they, you know, would share, or how did they get to be such a great presenter? Those sort of things will make people really readily accepting of invitations to connect kind of one-on-one. The wrong way, I won't say too much about this, but the wrong way is kind of that scattershot approach. And I'll give a really personal example. So when I interned back in college, I did an internship at a really big agency at the time in Los Angeles. And one of the interns in my intern class said, got scolded because he basically was like cold calling from his desk, like people at random at the agency, and kind of just like trying to like pick their brain, quote unquote. And it was just so disruptive to everyone's schedule. And obviously you guys won't have access to like phones per se. This is not that world, but just that mentality of like anyone or everyone, being really strategic, I think, about how and who you reach out to will go a really, really long way this summer. Lastly, I usually say in these presentations that we should be not like staying with just the interns, right? It's a little bit harder to just stick with interns this summer, which is kind of a good thing to push you outside of that and to really connect again with people outside of just your intern pool. If there are any opportunities from like a broader perspective to get into the agency culture and to kind of have that social element, whether it's like virtual happy hours or I don't know, I've seen different agencies have kind of more like fun events that they've been trying to do virtually. It can feel like a little awkward, but you know, especially for people, I'm a total introvert. Like I'm much more comfortable getting on something like this and like chatting someone up on chat versus like going up to them in person. So, you know, take advantage of that fact as well. All right, let's move into this second part. I want to make sure we have ample time for Q&A. So what to do if your internship doesn't end in a full-time offer? Again, for people who don't have internships, this is great advice for now. If anyone's heard me speak before, you might hear some familiar advice because I do think there are very specific things we can be doing with this time if we don't have an internship or if our internship ends and we don't get hired. All right, the first is if you've had an internship, use the connections that you've made. So all that work that you did in the last couple slides where you were making connections, you're getting to know people as you work with them, use them when you leave. So make sure that people have your personal email address and send that goodbye email at the end of the internship to be like, hey, I've loved working here. I'm looking for what's next. Would love any suggestions or direction or connections from you know, all of you or whatever. Because someone, you know, the industry is pretty small relatively. Someone you've worked with knows someone who is hiring. I can guarantee it. So you really use those connections you've made. And if, again, you don't have an internship this summer, if you've had a summer job or past internship or your professors, like or your alumni, like use those connections as you know, figure out what's next. Again, they might not all lead to a job or an internship right away, but leveraging the connections that you have made, especially if they're ones where they've, you know, seen your work really recently, goes such a long way. All right, for those of you who absolutely have to work, I think this is really important because not everyone can afford to just kind of like float along or like live at home with their parents. If you have to work, find opportunities in industries that are benefiting from all of us staying at home. And who knows how long we have to stay at home. So gaming, Amazon, collaborative platforms like Zoom or Slack, or esports. I mean, I mentioned gaming, you know, streaming platforms, Netflix, HBO Max, they just launched a new one. Like there's so many companies that are hiring because, again, of what's happening. So try to find those opportunities, and it might not be an advertising or marketing role, but I think the way to think about it is asking yourself these questions. You can screenshot this. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you know, how there are always things in any past job, even if it's like you're lifeguarding at the pool for the summer, there are things that will translate to what you do in advertising and marketing, even if it's just from a soft skills perspective. Keep these questions in mind as you're assessing different opportunities outside of the industry, because it'll help you identify those jobs, if you have to work, that will be beneficial to you in the long run. Be the maker the industry is looking for. So we talk about, oh, you know, this industry is full of makers and they're so creative and they want to like launch things, and you know, this is a great time to do that, whether it is personal creative projects like this went kind of totally viral. And if you don't know why this is cool, I mean, these are really old albums classic albums that they socially distanced, but you know, it's such an easy concept, and it happened outside of an agency. Like you don't need an agency to do really creative work and kind of put it out there in the world and get a reaction. And even if you don't get a reaction, like this kind of went viral, but even if you don't, like making sure that you're staying creative with kind of your own ideas, and kind of just, if you have these things that pop in your head, executing on them, since now we have the time. Another good option, putting all that brain power to do some good in the world. These are just 4 examples that have come up in the last couple months, if not that. Help Supply was done by some employees at Work & Co, I believe, which again, they're supporting healthcare workers on the front lines. There are a lot of great organizations doing a lot of great work, not just with healthcare, but a lot of things who need your brain and your skills. The 2 on the bottom were launched by students and new grads, and they're creating opportunities for other students and new grads who lost their internships. And I just think that is so great and such a good use of their time. And I'll tell you, both of those experiences, they've been able to attract so much industry attention and get mentors from really great agencies on board. So even if you're a student and you create something like that, you can attract the industry to come and want to get involved and make those connections that you would have hoped you would have made at an internship. So link up together, partner together. I am so encouraging of young talent to get together and make something, especially now. Reach out to people in the industry before they can give you what you need. This goes back to that connection, the networking piece of it, but now is a really, really great time to be finding people in the industry outside of, who you intern with or your company. And just being really, again, the next slide is going to talk about tactics to do that. But now is really the time, because you don't want to reach out to someone when you need a job right away. Obviously they can't give you a job right away because there's not that many jobs hiring, but reaching out to them and establish that connection and relationship for a more long-term, long game, versus expecting that person is going to turn around and somehow get you a job right away. And, it just feels, people can tell, it feels so transactional when someone comes at you with that energy. Instead, you just have a little bit extra time in your career to broaden your network before you've even started, which is awesome. So if you've ever seen me speak, this is a very common slide that I use because it's so important to reach out the right way. I get so much feedback from people in the industry about when people reach out to them and just kind of say, I want to pick your brain, or I want to hear about your career path. That's too general for people to grab onto. Be really specific about what you want to know from them, and try to hone in on that. You might want to hear everything about a person, but choose the top 2 things. I want to know how you switched from account management to strategy in your career, because I saw that in your LinkedIn profile, something like that. Outreach short and sweet, send thank yous and updates. Updates is really important. So a lot of times I get asked, how do you maintain a relationship with someone you've made a connection with for a long term? Give them updates on how their specific advice, how you used it, and where it's gotten you. So if someone emailed me and be like, hey, Natalie, I really appreciate our conversation a few months ago. I took your advice and reached out to this person, and that led to, a mentorship relationship, and eventually she hired me for an internship. That makes me so happy to hear that something small that I did led to that, and that makes me want to invest in that person more. So updates, super important. And lastly, leading with empathy, because everyone's trying to figure out this time and dealing with a lot in the world right now. So if someone doesn't get back to you right away, if just know that everyone's it's a little harder for anyone to do anything these days. So leading with empathy, asking how people are, that's another really great way to follow up with someone or continue that connection. Someone did that to me a few weeks ago, someone who I used to mentor a long time ago. She emailed me and was just I was thinking about you the other day. I know you just had a baby, was wondering how you're doing, just wanted to check in. Didn't ask for anything, it was really just a human to human question and email. So it was really lovely. Started a whole conversation. Lastly, extra time equals extra learning. So I'd love to invite everyone to think about this time less as a delay in your career and what's been taken away from you. I know a lot has, and that's legitimate. But try to think about it as that you have extra time before you have to start your career. So there are so many, whether it's this series or other conferences that have been made free and virtual, like 99U. There's so many online events. It's almost getting overwhelming now, to be honest. But create your own curriculum, basically. Maybe for the next few months of your internship, on top of your internship if you have it, or if you don't have one, come up with your own like schedule of conferences. Like every week I'm going to try to go to 2 talks of things that I'm interested in or things that I think will be useful. And just set that up for yourself on the calendar. Just again, this is such a great time to be growing your skills and learning. So however you can do that, and not all of them, not all the tools out there cost money. And I know that's a concern for some people. There are a lot of free resources out there. So taking advantage of those in this time, I think, is the last thing of those kind of 3 things I mentioned that you can do kind of if your internship doesn't end in a full-time role. Lastly, I sort of made this point earlier, but please don't burn yourself out before you've even begun. I know I just told you like, oh, here's are all the things you can do like during this time if you don't have an internship. That being said, all those things should be like contained within your day. So don't spend, every waking moment doing the things that I just said. Give yourself 3 or 4 hours at the beginning of the day, maybe like an hour later in the day, but in between, like give yourself time to just be and take care of yourself. Like there's so much going on, and there really is, I think, an emotional toll in all of us being separate and not knowing what's going to happen. So please, I always want to balance like me saying like, you can do all these things. Yes, you can, but it shouldn't take over your whole life. There are only so many hours we can spend searching for a job or creating our side project, blah, blah, blah. Like, yes, please hustle, but also don't hustle yourself to the ground, because when the industry does start hiring, we want the best out of you. And so we need you to be ready to go when that happens. So that's the last thing I'll say in terms of this time. I think, so before we open up to Q&A, this is We Are Next. That's not literally We Are Next. It's not an app or anything, but this is the website. All of our resources are listed there. We have so many resources, it's hard to describe, but we have a weekly newsletter. We have a podcast. We had a mentorship program called Coffee at a Distance, which is now, the first version of it has closed, but the second version of it, we're hoping to launch in maybe a month or so, sometime later this summer. And we have a couple other really great series that are going to be starting up, virtual series with agencies that are going to be starting up really soon. So check out the website. And that's it. Thank you guys so much.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all that. We got a ton of questions in the chat box while you were presenting.
Okay.
So we can start going through those, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, so Kendall asks that her internship told her to expect some downtime because it is a large team and they all have light days sometimes. Do you have any advice on what to do during downtime that's still productive for her internship?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was talking about in that slide about where it was like too much or not enough work. That not enough work is exactly what you're talking about with the downtime. So I would say, finding ways to add value outside of client projects. So outside of the projects that you've been given, what else can you do? The examples that I shared were kind of like, is it like a trend report you put together, or like a newsletter that's keeping tabs on a certain industry or vertical? Or is it, organizing the agency's like archive of like TV spots? Like there are really simple things that I know any of you on this call can easily do that would add so much value to an agency, like but they wouldn't think of themselves, right? The other thing is, and I would say this even if you were working in the office, if you do have downtime, don't be afraid to like do all that networking stuff outside of the agency, especially this summer. Like no one's looking over your shoulder seeing what you're doing when you have a light day. So I would also do that networking part as well, giving yourself that time. And if you have, again, like a creative side project or anything that you've been wanting to work on, again, like using that time to do that. I don't think you have to feel like, oh, I feel guilty because I'm not 100% of my internship time working on, client stuff or agency stuff. Again, if you've proactively asked everyone and you've come up with ideas on how you can add value, and you've done all that and you still have downtime, like it's your time. So I would encourage, outside of the things I already mentioned, the networking part and like, taking it to work on any side projects that you have, I think is totally fine.
Okay. Blair just graduated and she's not sure what she should be doing right now to try and get a job. It sometimes feels insensitive to reach out to people in this time, and it's hard to make conversation because a normal workday is now abnormal. What should she be doing right now to take steps to get hired?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the focuses for this time actually shouldn't be getting a job. I know that sounds really crazy because we all want to start our career and want to get a job, but I don't want people killing themselves to find jobs that don't exist right now, because the reality is a lot of people, the hiring has been frozen and there's not allowed to hire, or, things are slow. But that being said, like I said earlier in the presentation, like you really don't want to wait until there's an open job to be making those connections with people. And I actually have heard from we had a recruiter roundtable series where, we had like a panel, basically virtual panel with different recruiters from different agencies. And a few of them were like, I've noticed that the number of people who've like reached out to me during this time has gone down significantly, because people think like, well, there's no open job, so like, why would I reach out to the recruiter? Or maybe people think they're just like extra busy. They're always going to be busy. So whether it's a recruiter or, someone who works at the company, I think, now is a perfect time to be reaching out to those people to, again, you're not reaching out to them necessarily opening with like, hey, do you have any open jobs? Or like, when do you think you'll be hiring? Because again, a lot of people will just tell you that they don't know, because there's a lot of unknowns. But opening with, hey, I'm really interested in your company and would love to hear a little bit more about your experience there, how you got there. Try to be really specific. Don't say pick your brain, but try to be really specific about what you're asking about them or about the company, and having those conversations and building that relationship. Because then once you like have an in with a couple people at a company you're really interested in, when they do have an open position, you'll be in a great, I know my video's lagging, I can see, you'll be in a great position to get hired, because you won't be one of those random people who are applying via their application website or LinkedIn. You'll be like an internal referral. This person will be like, hey, I've actually been chatting with this person for like months now. They reached out, back in May and blah, blah, blah. So play the long game, get in through the back door. That's what I always say, versus the front door being like, I'm waiting for an open position. I apply via the website and my resume goes into this like black box of who knows what and who looks at it. So that's what I would say in terms of like those steps towards getting hired. Try not to chase the actual like open job descriptions, because there's not a lot out there. I mean, certainly apply to the ones that are out there, but I think that kind of finding those connections within will go way farther for you.
Okay, great. Casey wants to know, when is it appropriate to ask for referrals from people especially for the large tech and media companies that you mentioned before, like Netflix and Amazon, that may be still hiring? She's heard that hiring at those types of companies is influenced significantly by referrals from people who already work there, but she's not quite sure how to ask for one, especially if people are complete strangers or people she only knows through a LinkedIn connection.
That's true that a lot of those big companies, referrals go a really long way. Based on what I just said too, referrals go a really long way. I would say if you're looking for a referral, I wouldn't try to approach a stranger for a referral, because the whole point of referral is that person is putting their like kind of name on the line to say, hey, this person that I know is going to be awesome for this job or is awesome for this company because I know their work. I know, how they are as a coworker, or I worked with them, blah, blah, blah. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend reaching out to complete strangers who work at a company just because you want to become their referral. For people that maybe you're connected with on LinkedIn already, I mean, hopefully you've had some sort of working relationship with them again. But if not, I mean, you could start that conversation, kind of like I said, the last question, to, again, you're opening with like, yes, you're interested in working at the company, but you're not opening with like, hey, I'd love to use you as a referral. Like, can you do that for me? Try to approach it as like recon of what's their experience of working at this company. I want to talk about this industry that you're in, et cetera, et cetera. How has it been working remotely for one of these big companies? Like, what's that experience been like? try to be creative with like what you're asking them and how that conversation goes. And hopefully you can foster that relationship so that you can turn to them. And if there is an open position, and be like, hey, I saw that there's this open job. I'm super interested in it, especially based on what you said about the company and how it is to work there. Would you consider referring me to the hiring team? Once you've had established even just a little bit of that connection, they're much more likely to pass you on. Again, if they've seen your work, if they've had a couple conversations with you. But again, the more someone knows you, like, it's hard because you want to help everyone, but you have to realize that person, it was really putting like their own, not neck, but like reputation a little bit. Like if they say, hey, this person would be great, and the person ends up not being great for whatever reason, like that looks really bad on that person who referred them. So you want to have a little bit of that relationship too. But if you do, please don't feel awkward to ask. Like you care about your career more than anyone else. No one's sitting there thinking like, maybe I should refer this person that I like kind of know. Like, so you have to be the one to make that ask. And I encourage you to do so if you do have that relationship with someone.
Okay, Caroline asks, how do you balance being self-reliant while still making sure you're being seen or noticed in your internship?
How do you balance being self-reliant with being seen? Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, how do you balance being self-reliant while making sure you are still being seen or noticed in your internship?
Seen or noticed in your internship? Yeah, so that's a great question. So in terms of the self-reliant part, I always tell people to try to follow your instincts, because they will get you about 85% of the way towards the right answer or the right approach. Advertising, marketing, it's all very subjective. So a lot of times our gut instincts will take us a lot of the way there. And then that last 10 to 15% is kind of course correction and guidance from like our larger team to kind of boost our work. So, I will start by saying kind of like trust your instincts while balancing it with asking for help. Like I said earlier, if you really don't know, if you're really stuck on something. In terms of being seen and heard, I mean, I definitely don't think those two are mutually exclusive. Like, I think you can do both in a really lovely way. In terms of being seen and heard, especially on like group calls, I feel like a lot of people might struggle with this because it's hard in a in-person room to sort of cut in. That's the hardest part of any meeting, especially if you're young. I will tell everyone on this Zoom call, half thoughts are thoughts too. So a lot of times as interns, we like wait so we have the perfect thing to say. And maybe this goes back to the self-reliant thing. We wait till we have like the perfect thing to say before we want to say it, because we don't want to come off like we don't know what we're doing or that we're like stupid or whatever. You're not. Like, you are chosen to be part of this internship. And the value that you bring are those kind of thoughts and ideas that you have, even if they're half formed. And you never know what like your one little half idea will spark in someone else. So for a virtual call, again, like if you feel more comfortable like chatting someone on the side, this is actually an exercise that I do like in person, like finding someone in the room who can kind of like alley-oop you to be like, hey, Natalie and I were talking earlier about this project, and she had a really great finding about this audience. Natalie, do you want to share what you told me? And then I'm teed up to kind of say what it is that I came up with or whatever. You can do that in a virtual environment through the private chat, to be like to your boss or whoever is also in the room, to be like, hey, I actually have a really great insight on this. Like, I'd love to share, if you don't feel comfortable like breaking in. It's not something you'll use forever, but it's a great way to start to like get your voice heard. And lastly, I would say like, I know this answer is a little bit all over the place, but there's so many things about like being heard, but feel free to take ownership of your work. Like, yes, everything's like a team effort for sure, but we also want to be getting credit where credit's due. And that might mean standing behind, like, whether it's like a creative idea you had or like a strategy that you put together, even if it's like you're not sure if it's right. Like, standing by it, I think early in your career will go such a long way in like establishing like your presence, quote unquote, in the office or in the company. So, finding ways to do that as well, I think is really important, even as an intern.
Okay. Michaela is wondering, for internships, what questions should they ask to get a one-on-one intro meeting with team members to get those insider insights?
The question, how you want to phrase it, because obviously you don't want to like come off like you're trying to get like gossip about out of them or anything like that. But the question that you ask is, um, what are some things you've learned over the course of like you working here that have been helpful to, you know, working with other team members or, you know, executing on projects? Like, what have you found to be like some best practices or some like tips that you can pass on to me? You're making it clear that it's like based on their experience, like what things have they figured out that you should know to help set you up for to have like a really great summer? That's a really like easy, safe way. And trust me, like the things will start coming out. As if you're in a one-on-one like environment, like stuff, those insights will come out if you ask like that.
Okay. Caroline wants to know if you have any tips for working with a stubborn manager that's difficult to work with or communicate as an intern.
That's such a hard situation for anyone, especially an intern. I think the first thing is that just accept that, not accept them, but accept the fact that you're not going to change them, that their behavior that you see, like them being stubborn, there's probably not a lot you can do about that. I'm not saying accept what they say to you and like you just have to take everything that they tell you, but you'll have to find different ways to communicate them with them that doesn't butt up against kind of like how they are. And this is with any manager, whether they're stubborn or I don't know, they're all over the place, they're like not organized or anything. It takes a little bit of time to learn kind of like their working style and how they might be most open to outside input. So posing things as a question versus a statement, like, oh, like maybe is there any value in doing it this way or considering this option? I'm not saying specifically for like a stubborn person, but in general, just like finding different ways to approach it. A lot of times, like getting other people to kind of not be on your side, but if you have like a point of view or something that like you're trying to push through with this manager, talking with it with other team members and kind of getting their buy-in and bringing that to your manager. Again, not to like shove it in their face that they're wrong or anything, but just to let them know that you have like the confidence and input and you've run it by these other people and they've like given you the thumbs up, and you feel really great about that, you know? So it's kind of being creative about the ways that you like learn to work with them while knowing, again, if you think like, man, like I really wish they were different, I wish I could change them, you know, it's an uphill battle. I will say if it's a real working problem, it's getting in the way of like you working, having a conversation with them, like, again, you don't have to call them out and be like, you're really stubborn and that doesn't like work, you know, it's not going well. Frame it as like, I'd love to sit down and talk with you about ways to better work together, or the ways that you would like to communicate with me, or I want to communicate with you so that we're like the most productive, the most efficient, you know, the most effective team. If you phrase it like that in terms of like for the better of the agency and the team, it won't be that won't put them into defensive mode of like, oh, like they're saying I'm a bad manager or anything like that. So that would be my advice for again, any sort of manager who has a quirk or something that is getting in the way of you doing what you need to do.
Okay, Sam Creek doesn't have a question, but he has 2 comments. Balance all the different hats you wear. You don't have to wear them all at once every day. And he also said that wearenext.com has saved his life numerous times. So I just share that with you. That's awesome.
Thank you, Sam.
Justin does have a question though, and Justin wants to know if you have any advice for people that lost their internship due to COVID.
The first thing I will say is if you got an internship and then lost it, put that internship on your resume. You still got the internship and the agency chose you. That says a lot. Put it on your resume. You can say that it was canceled due to COVID, but just let people know in the future that you were chosen. I think that's really something important that I would want to say. Keep really in close touch with those people that you were going to work with. So whoever the HR manager or hiring manager was, whoever was going to be your direct boss or teammates, even if you haven't met them yet, I would say, like if you're going to join a team as an intern and it didn't happen, find some of those team members online and be like, hey, this happened. I'm really bummed I won't be able to work with you this summer, but I would love to keep in touch. And then, again, ask all the things I said before, like asking them those very specific questions that will engage them in conversation, so that you're maintaining those relationships. Because if they chose you once, like people will be hiring eventually. I don't know when, but when that opens up, again, you will probably already be, but you want to be top of mind. So make sure you don't let those relationships kind of fall by the wayside just because it didn't work out. And then all the advice in that second section in terms of like what you can be doing to build your experience and your connections now, if you don't have an internship, I think apply here. And, hiring managers and people who are on the recruitment side, when this is all over, they're not going to be looking at resumes, expecting like work experience. Like if you have it, great. They're going to be looking for like, how did you creatively use this time to continue to build your skills, to continue to, stay on top of what's going on in the industry. They're going to be looking for that. So you don't have to feel like, dang, I don't have an internship now. Like I'm screwed. I didn't get that foot in the door that I wanted to. Absolutely not. So, all is not lost. So many people are dealing with this now about internships being taken away. But I think there are really concrete things that you can do in the meantime, again, to sort of make up for the fact that you're not in the company right now.
Okay, Haley also has another nice comment. She wants to let you know how much you've helped her in her still budding career. And coming from a university with no advertising program, We Are Next is literally a godsend. So
thank you.
Natalie.
I love hearing that. I went to a school without an advertising program too, so I know.
It's tough out there. Okay, yeah. He has another question. What recommendations do you have for recent graduates who are applying for full-time jobs outside of their home state? She's hoping to apply to companies outside of her home state that she can get hired for and work remotely. But once restrictions are lifted, she's concerned that she would then have to move to that state once the company returned to the office. So what's your recommendation there?
Yeah. Being super transparent about what you're looking for out of the arrangement, and then asking them to be explicit about what their expectations are too, because you don't want to be set yourself up for the situation where you get hired and then when things go back to normal, like you don't actually want to move to that city. Not to say you shouldn't apply. You should definitely apply if you, again, like we want to get work where we can get it right now, but being really upfront with them about, and they'll probably ask, honestly, during the interview process, like, when this is over, are you willing to move to, whatever state? And then being open with them about that. You don't want to burn any bridges or be the person who causes it. It takes a lot of time and effort to hire someone, to choose someone to bring onto your team, even remotely. So if you go through that and then they hire you and then you don't want to move, and so they have to let you go or you quit or whatever, it's going to leave a super bad taste in that agency's or a company's mouth. So again, apply, have that conversation. You don't have to open with it, be like, hey, I am interested in this remote position, but I'm not willing to move. But in the course of your conversation with them, as you learn more about the opportunity, definitely make sure you're asking that question. Like in the interview, when they're like, oh, do you have any questions for us? You can ask what are the expectations around, when things go back to normal? Is there still the opportunity to work remotely? And it's something you can push for too. If you can prove hey, I'm super effective working remotely, maybe that's a situation that you can propose especially once they like you and they want you, on the team. But be really open and transparent about that. I think on both ends, I think is really, really important. But that's a great question. Very relevant to now.
Okay, you have another fan. Samira says, I just have to say, Natalie, you are amazing. She's been using We Are Next since 2018. It's her go-to for everything industry related. Thank you for creating the platform.
Oh, you're welcome. I really appreciate that. That's really nice.
Another question from Jill. First, she thanks you for your great talk. And then she asks, what tips can you recommend to limit Zoom or online burnout? Could you also recommend any resources that show ways to organize data and archival documents? She's nervous about having too many documents that it will get confusing.
Oh, that second part, I don't know anything off the top of my head. That's a great question, though. I'm sure there is something out there. I mean, setting up like a folder structure for yourself before like you begin, even if it's just like a basic one, like if you have a folder on your desktop, you're more likely to like start putting things in there versus like, so like if you have an internship and you have like a folder that is like, you know, like intro documents or like, you know, paperwork that you have to sign or whatever. And then you have like folders by whatever client or teams that you're on, and then starting to build folders within that. That's like literally all, like my desktop, you don't want to see my desktop. It's like so unorganized. So I feel you. But I don't have any great resources in terms of like, I'm sure there's some out there though. To the first part of your question, can you remind me the first part of the question?
Yeah, it was about limiting Zoom or online burnout.
Okay, great question. So one thing I think is a great tip, and I saw this the other day, is you can start a Zoom meeting with your camera on and be like, hey, everybody, like people can see you're there. Then turn off your camera. Like they're not going to think that like you just like left or you're not engaged. Like feel free to do that, especially if you're not, I mean, if you're not presenting, of course. Like, because it's exhausting to be like on when you're like in front of a camera. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you just, and you like, you feel like you have to dress up and stuff like, you know, like just if you feel like you need it, turn your camera off when you're doing your calls or meetings. You can be really open about it. Be like, hey, like I'm here. I'm going to be taking notes. I'm going to, you know, whatever I'm going to be doing. But I'm going to turn my camera off for this meeting just to like focus on, you know, what I'm doing, or just like feeling a little burnt out today. If you don't mind, I'm going to turn off my camera. No one's going to be like, keep your camera on. You know what I mean? Like, or no one's going to think that that's weird, especially these days, again, because we're all dealing with that to some extent. And the other thing is to put boundaries on your day. Again, this feels super unintuitive for an intern because we want to say like, yes, I'm available, whatever you need. Again, I'm not saying don't do that, but let's say someone emails you late at night because they're just online. They email you, not for a Zoom call per se, but like they email you at 10 p.m. about something and you happen to be up and you happen to see it and you email them back. Now you've set the precedent that you're available at 10 p.m. and that's going to keep happening. If you don't respond to them, because chances are they probably don't need a response like that night. It's probably something for the next day that they're just trying to get, you know, off their plate. Wait till the morning, email them first thing in the morning and get going that way. There are really small ways to set those boundaries. I encourage everyone to do that. And if you don't have an internship, again, time blocking. I'm networking with the industry, but only between the hours of 9 and 11 in the morning. And then after that, no more calls, no more Zoom things. It's heads down working on, my side project or whatever, as an example.
Okay. Are we still good to take a couple more questions? We have a few more in the chat.
I can probably do one more.
One more. Oh my goodness. Okay. So now I'm going to, that's okay. That's all right. Okay. So, okay, this is actually a great one because you used to be in strategy. Jessica wants to know if you have any tips for aspiring strategists since there aren't a lot of entry-level positions. And what are your thoughts on doing grad school versus starting in another department and working your way into strategy?
Okay, I'll address the second one first. Grad school is an option to get into the industry. It's not the only option. So there are a lot of benefits to going to a portfolio school or a grad school if you have the time and the money. Again, that's not an option for everyone. So please don't feel like you are at a loss because you didn't go to portfolio school. There are so many different ways to get that experience. We've talked about a lot of them here. So that's what I would say about the second part. In terms of going another direction to get into strategy, I'm all for it. I mean, I say like, if you know you want to be a strategist, sometimes like there's benefit in like holding out, but I would say that kind of like on a normal year. I think if you really want to work, especially for strategy, because it's one of those, one of those positions where like you can really do anything, literally anything. I've met so many strategists who have done things outside of the industry, across the industry, who've ended up in strategy. It's all valuable experience. It's all shaping your POV. So, you know, whether it's account management or media or something else, and that gets you to where you want to go. As long as you have that North Star and looking for opportunities where, again, like those skills like can directly translate, you're good. And if you're applying to those positions, don't be upfront about wanting to actually be a strategist, but doing this instead. Like, be all in on like, I'm applying for this account management role, because the person who's hiring you doesn't want to hear that you're going to jump to be a strategist like in a couple months. Again, keep that in the back of your head, but you know, be all in on those other roles. Yeah, strategy entry level, super, super rare. Internships also very rare. But again, like finding a different way in, the beauty of strategy is that literally you can do anything. So whether it's a summer job, you know, wrangling kids at a daycare, or there are so many things that inform how we see the world, and that's all that strategy is. And being able to formulate our POV, doing research, like understanding people. There's so many things out there that allow us to do that. So the world's kind of your oyster, and strategy is definitely not one of those things where it's like, oh, it's a bunch of hard skills that you need to know in order to be like, boom, you're a strategist. It's really the way you think. So that's what I'll say about that.
Okay, Natalie. Well, thank you so much for spending this last hour with us. I know, you know, you're busy. You're a new mom, so we don't want to take up any more of your time. If you all have any other questions or want to connect with Natalie, her contact info is on the screen here. And don't forget to register for our next session next week with Stephanie Freed. Sorry, she is the CMO of Fandom, which is a media platform, and she can talk about what it's like to get your start in media. It'll be open to questions. So if you've ever wanted to ask a CMO questions, now's your chance. So thank you again, Natalie. We really loved having you. I think everyone learned a ton, and we are looking forward to connecting with you all again next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.